Welcome into a special edition of the Maine Celtics podcast. It's the Maine Celtics podcast playoff edition. Getting ready for the 2024 playoffs. Maine Celtics earned a first-round bye. They are in the second round of the Eastern Conference playoffs, and we have found out who the Celtics will play Thursday night at the Expo. The Delaware Blue Coats, the 6th seed, knocked off the 3 seed Indiana last night. We are recording here on a Wednesday morning. I'm in my comfy clothes. Chris Whitney is too. He's got his Canes quarter zip on because it's early, and we're doing this for purposes of getting this podcast out, ready for the people to consume, getting set for another playoff game for the Maine Celtics. And Chris, I want to lead with this because we'll talk to Blaine Miller. He is our guest today, the head coach who joined us at the early part of the season. We've had a chance to talk to Blaine a bunch throughout the course of the year, pregame for radio. And we should plug the broadcast. We will be live from the Expo on 96.3, The Big Jab in Portland, across your radio dial. Radio only for Chris and I on Thursday. The live game broadcast will be on ESPN News at 7 o'clock, and you want to be sure to get your tickets at mainceltics.com. When we talked to Blaine Miller, it struck me right before we had him come on for the podcast today. This Maine Celtics franchise had not made the playoffs in 6 years. Their last playoff berth was 2017. They got there last year, did not get the bye. They had to play Cleveland in the first round. Right around a year ago now, we were doing that Cleveland game in the afternoon when the Celtics got in. But two drastically different teams, two different head coaches. Only two players from last year's team were on this year's team, J.D. Davison and Tony Snell. The roster turnover, the changing in coaching, and really just the dynamic and how Jarrell Christian decided to build both of these teams. This is really a call out to give Jarrell some love. Pretty impressive how this group got back here, because I know they're going to run into a Delaware team that's been to the finals 3 years in a row, and they deserve that credit too, right? Like they've had guys. They've got a couple of rookies, Ricky Council, Terquavion Smith. We'll get into Delaware later on in the show. But just wanted to call that out. The Celtics should deserve some credit here, getting back to the playoffs consecutive years with two completely different teams.
It is, and then we talk about Delaware coming in. Maine and Boston work so in cohesion so well. The program, we'll call it, is so well that they're getting that consistent level because they're worried about Maine and they're using Maine. So you're getting those players that are the NBA futures. It's not just filling a roster anymore. And then you have a Delaware team who they've been in the finals the last 2 years. And they're back in there this year. They go in the 6th seed, the upset the 3 seed. But you look at their roster, and it's the same thing. You know how you have Mac McClung and Osceola. They had Kenny Lofton on the team at the start of the season. He's now on another team, but they bring in other guys that are there. You talk about Jaden Springer, who's up at the Boston Celtics. He was the conference MVP last year in the G League finals even. And he's now with Boston up in the big club, but they're still able to just reload and build that. And that's where Maine's now getting to, is that constant and consistent playoff contender each year you go in. And you touch on how we talked to Blaine a lot, but we talked to him early in the year. We talked to him and you can just see that kind of confidence in him. He's at ease because he really likes the roster he's got. And Jarrell didn't do just a good job of the talent-wise. He brought in a team of guys that want to be there with each other. They play so well together, but they play for each other. And that's what it's hard when you get guys that are coming to this league. You have the 3 two-way guys that have that NBA contract already, and they're going back and forth. But you have the other, call it 9, 10 guys on that roster that are looking for an NBA contract as well, anywhere in the NBA. So you got guys that may want to show out a little more, and you may see it on other teams. There might be some isolation. But with this team, you're looking at like your team that Mainers love. It's all the way from grassroots up that they're there playing for each other, and they're there to win. They're not there looking for an NBA contract each and every game. They're there looking for a W every game, and that's what he's got. Jarrell has built just a group of guys that are just good people. They support each other. They play hard for each other. They do the little things for each other. And, and you can see it in game by game through the regular season where there was just a different leading scorer, a different star, multiple times and consistently throughout the year, even with guys coming and going. My guy, Jordan Shackle, who I was excited about at the start of the year, unfortunately gets an injury, and they bring in guys like a Wieskamp. And Wieskamp comes in. He's diving on the floor. He's a shooter, but he's a grinder. He's going to rebound. He's going to be on the floor getting steals. And that's what, Shackle had that. He could shoot. and he had that chip on his shoulder where he did the little things, and they were just easy. They bring in Wieskamp, and it's just an easy transition to him, and the team's really just rolling right now as we get into this semifinal matchup.
The Celtics have figured out this whole thing where you can have a former head coach go to the front office. I mean, it's with Stevens in Boston and Jarrell here. Again, I don't know it off the top of my head. I'd have to go look, but I don't know many dynamics like that across the league. Former head coaches in executive roles. Now, we've seen executive roles. Some head coaches have that personnel power and be the head coach. That's happened before, but just seeing it happen twice at both levels, they figured, well, if Brad got confidence from Danny Ainge to do the job in Boston, I think it was only fair for Brad to be open-minded like that. And Jarrell's did a good job. Now we'll see what happens, right? I mean, but 2 playoff berths in the G League, that's pretty good because of the constant maneuvering of the roster with guys getting called up, assignment players, travel, which with the NBA teams and the G League teams, illnesses. I mean, go right down the list. There's so many things. Let's do a quick minute here on Delaware. So they beat, again, we're recording this portion of the podcast on Wednesday morning. We did a Blaine Miller interview yesterday, and which you'll hear that coming up here in just a moment to preview the postseason and just where the team's at. But from a Delaware perspective, they shot the lights out yesterday. They got off to a roaring start in the first quarter, made 7 of their first 9 from 3. I love Ricky Council's game. I'm looking forward to the Council v. Jordan Walsh, Arkansas rematch. They did face each other during the season. Terquavion Smith is a spark plug for them off the bench. He kind of fulfills the role of a DJ Stewart in terms of has embraced coming off the bench. And even though they've had guys in and out, but something that's jumped out to you is their size. And that did not matter last night for them because they just made shots. They shot 47% from 3 last night.
No, and I talked to my dad this morning, and I brought it up to him. It was almost a game last night where you had a bigger Mad Ants team, and you had that athletically not as big Delaware team, but it was like when you're in high school and your dad's still playing in the pickup games with his buddies, and it's them against you. They're just so old school positionally well on defense. The size doesn't matter because they play their assignments and they position themselves so well on defense. They're, on the help side was great. And just because you're not as big doesn't mean you're slower by any means too. And they're a really quick team, but they have some guys, your Clarks, you touched on at Council. They have some guys that are in that 6'5", 6'6" range, but they're big guys in that range. Clark is a big dude and takes up some space down there and he'll bang with you, but it's just how well they are positionally on defense. And that showed last night when they played against a Mad Ants team that was looking to get inside, drive the hoop. They were looking at that 10-15 mid-range jumper. They're not a big fan of shooting the 3 all the time, but the Blue Coats did such a good job of just being in position, knowing their assignments, and taking care of defensively. They were able to shut that down from the Mad Ants.
So we will see the Blue Coats tomorrow. Maine Celtics went 3-1 against the Blue Coats in the regular season and the showcase seasons combined. Most recently, a 2-game sweep on the 5-game road trip. Quickly, before we go to Blaine Miller, Chris, want to just weigh in here? We're going to dive into a lot with Blaine Miller. It's really hard. I say this to Blaine in the interview, but it's hard not to show some love for everybody on that roster because we've had moments throughout the year where everyone really has made an impact on this team, whether a guy's out, someone slides in, someone moves up the rotation. It's difficult to try, and Blaine is long-winded, and we joke about that, but I mean that in the most loving way possible. But it's kind of true. Like, this team has had all 13, 14, 15 guys, whoever's been in uniform, make an impact. And one guy that's been new to the team, we had him on the last pod, was Joe Wieskamp, that you wanted to shout out.
I just love Joe's game. It's one of those things where, he's the ultimate kind of setup guy to where he can get into that short corner 3. He can make that when the help side defense slides off him. He can, off the dribble, he'll knock down a shot. He will dribble penetrate. And he showed that in the last game of the regular season in Texas, where he gave a little up fake. He went to the rim and he pounded the thing down to the dunk. And his athleticism just kind of jumps off the screen to you. And him and Peterson play so well off each other. And when you put a facilitator in between them, that's a really hard ticket to stop. And, you go up and down the main lineup. We've seen Brandon Slater come up and pop off in games. And, he's coming off the bench like 6, 7, sometimes 8, depending on if there's call ups, call downs. I think I would love to go back through the box scores and see how many different leading scorers Maine has had in games over the season, because it would just go crazy. Everyone has had their moment, but you talk about the Wieskamps, the Petersons, and, and the Walshes, and it's just watching them get to, build the confidence around each other and know where each other's going. Jordan Walsh's game has been great, but in him and Joe having the real athlete like Walsh on the wing with a Wieskamp that can break guys down and they have to worry about him shooting, and you can have Walsh moving all over the place with his body. And I think Jordan, you go and you talk about him being down with Maine for developmental purposes. And I've touched on it on broadcasts all year where you see the little things that he does now that he didn't do then, we'll call it. And the last game against Texas, you got a second and a half left. He has a three that early in the year, he's got like 2 feet of space that he's probably going to force up. It's a head fake. He gets to his left hand and he goes up to the rim and draws the foul with 0.4 seconds left, knocks down the free throw and wins. And I would bet my money if we were able to go back a month and a half, he's going to pop up that 3 ball and it's not going to be the best shot. His game's just come so far, and that was by far and out his best game of the season against Texas when Maine needed it the most because they needed the win to get to this 2 seed in the bye. It was just real special to see, and it shows what Boston's really doing with their program down here in Maine and developing guys.
Yeah, it was a perfect exclamation point for fans, and if fans didn't tune in, and looking forward for folks to listen to Blaine Miller here, give his remarks on Jordan Walsh and what his year has been. But I think it's safe to say that finale, and there's still more to come here at the playoffs, but that finale at Texas was a great way to encapsulate the growth of the second-round pick out of Arkansas. Without further ado, let's go to the head coach of the Maine Celtics. Blaine Miller will return after for a quick preview of what the G League playoff bracket looks like. Here we are with the head coach of the Maine Celtics, Blaine Miller, for our emergency playoff podcast. The Maine Celtics earned a first-round playoff bye. They are set to take on the winner of Indiana and Delaware on Thursday at the Expo, 7 o'clock start. Blaine Miller, how you doing? Nice month of March for your team, 9-2.
Yeah, not bad. Not bad. I'm doing pretty well because of that.
When we talked to you at the beginning of the season, we had Blaine on the inaugural episode of the Maine Celtics podcast. What would you say? So let me take you back now, because when we had that stretch of games at home, there was a back-to-back in there with Greensboro, and there was a Westchester game, the last home game of the season. Something you had discussed, defensive rebounding was going to be a key to your team down the stretch. And in the month of March, you ranked third in the G League in defensive rebounds at 37 a game. What changed as far as your identity on the defensive glass? Because that was something you harped on, and your team delivered on that front.
Yeah, I mean, it was for us, like we had always been in that top half of the league. Even before March, we were flirting and in the top 10 in terms of just overall defense. And for us, it was just kind of that glaring weakness of this one metric, this one area, just didn't fit with the rest of our identity. We had we were one of the best opponent effective field goal percentage teams. We turned teams over just enough. We defended without fouling just enough, but really that defensive rebounding was in the low 20s or high 20s, if you will. Mm-hmm. And for us, I think we just continued to harp on it, continued to talk about it in film, all the different iterations and ways you can get beat on the defensive glass with, especially with our bigs, putting them in a position to succeed and help our defense with their shot blocking and rim protection. And, on the weak side, that does expose you to offensive rebounds if you don't rotate and crack down. That one probably being the biggest, and then just perimeter crashing. So, really over the last month and a half, just the continual emphasis through film, through practice, talking about it, and really ultimately, like that's how you finish games. And for us, I mean, even that the game the other night against Texas, some really, really awesome defensive possessions for us, but some finished with great defensive rebounding, the physicality, extra efforts to get back into play, to rotate, smalls on bigs, all of that stuff where we hold the team to 11 points in the fourth quarter. That's a big part of it.
I find it so fascinating and eerie that there was a stretch in March where Boston won 9 in a row with 8 different starting lineups. And here are the Maine Celtics doing something similar, not as many games, but in this stretch here, you won 6 in a row, the last game of February, then you won the first 5 games of March, all on the road. 5 of those 6 are on the road. The Wisconsin trip, you had Delaware in there. some really, high level teams. In the East, as we've talked about all year, the East has been so jam packed. There's really no path. I mean, we did your game at the end of February, and the last game we did before the trip, you were in 9th place. Then you wind up in 2nd place. What can you say about the group as far as the buy-in with interchangeable pieces, guys changing their roles really on a night-to-night basis here down the stretch?
Yeah, I think coming off the Birmingham games where we lost both by combined 3 points, we just talked about just the opportunity in front of us, not just to make a push for the playoffs or anything like that. It's the way it's panned out has been beyond my wildest dreams and expectations and hopes for this group. But really just the opportunity to play together. I mean, even going back to when we had our first conversation, we've talked about it all year, how much these guys enjoy being around each other, playing together, hanging out, whether it's on the court, in the locker room, at the hotel, on trips, whatever. They really enjoy being around each other, and they're just a great group of people. And so for us, it was we talked about just the opportunity and kind of the shared love that we have as a group that's really special, and how no matter what, after that we had 12 games remaining at that point, that it was going to come to an end one way or the other, and to do whatever we could for it to be on our terms, and to just enjoy it. And really since then it's kind of taken off. But I give a ton of credit to a guy like DJ Stewart, who's probably the epitome of what you're referencing in terms of just whatever's been asked of him, he's stepped up and done his job, whether it's been the backup combo guard, point guard, starting 2 guard. He had a magnificent month, with regardless of how he fit in exactly to the rotation. And then our bigs, Kai and JB especially, just making huge jumps and leaps, and you could just see that, and that really anchored our defense. But you really go down the line. We had some injuries, some sicknesses, guys getting recalled because Boston needed some extra bodies. Sure. And whether it's been the Don Carey's and Jay Jacks and Scotty Hobsons of the team, where it's one night, hey, you're playing 15 minutes, and the next night somebody's back and you're out of the rotation, and they're still amazing teammates and professionals, and they're everybody's been ready when their number's been called, regardless of the situation. And a ton of credit to our coaching staff, to the assistant coaches who spend a lot of time with those guys, with the Stay Ready group. Pregame, certainly, but then, in their workouts on a daily basis, to have them ready and prepared to plug in with whatever they're needed to do and asked to do, and they're ready to fulfill those roles. And again, you see that kind of shared collective love and appreciation for guys. And again, just going back to Saturday's game with Texas, and Don Carey, who's for the most part this year been played a bit and at times, but for the most part has been an end of the rotation, end of the bench guy who's just been the consummate pro and consummate teammate, steps in and plays a huge role, being the primary handler and setting the table offensively, but then defensively, what he brought to the game was really special to see. Took him 49 games for that opportunity to present himself, and he was ready for that moment.
It's really hard to go up and down your roster, how it's currently constructed, and really anyone that's played for your team this year, going back to Jordan Shackle, for instance, who was a key piece. And I mean this in the most loving way. It's like you forget he was even on the team, the way you've just had guys come in and out of your lineup. Jared Wilson-Frame, who's played in stints for other teams. He's been bouncing around the league. He's played impact minutes. And then we haven't even discussed some of the key pieces to the Boston organization, such as Anemias Queta, who's been on a 2-way. You've only had him for just a double-digit games, I think 13 now for the year, 11, 12, 13 games for Nimi this year. 11 games, 8 starts. You've had Nimi here down the stretch. Jordan Walsh goes for 27 against Texas, makes a key free throw to win that game for you. So
missed a key free throw as well. Supposed to miss it. That's very important.
It's true.
So he intentionally missed, and it messed up his free throw percentage. Sorry to interrupt you. But just as crucial as making it was missing.
Yeah, that's true. With the time on the clock, time, situation, those things come into play. What's it been like having Queta here down the stretch? And your front court with Kyler Kelly and James Banks has already been one of the best tandems in the league. What's it been like now mixing Nimi in the mix with those two?
I mean, it starts with him as a person and Kai and JB. Again, just being understanding of the situation and what's being asked of them. And we've had times this year where Nimi's been assigned, and Kyler's been the other big, and there's been times where JB's been the other big, and there's been times when only one of them's been available. But their relationship collectively, it starts with that. It's like it's a tough thing to do. It's a tough situation to be in, but it's just a reality, and that goes for every team. So having a couple guys who have been in the G League,
Sure.
are professionals, understand how that works, certainly goes a long way. And then Nimi, who he is, who steps in and I think has a lot of gratitude and appreciation and awareness that he's not coming down here to, it's his show or to just like push those guys off. He loves being around those guys. So from the human standpoint, that makes the transition for everybody, especially myself as the head coach, to have to sit down those guys and have those conversations and then make those decisions in the game when, we certainly all feel like all three of those guys can help us in different ways. But, Nimi just obviously, runner up for MVP last year, one of the best defensive centers in the whole league when he plays at our level, at this level. He's just a different athlete. He's really kind of the culmination of JB and Kai, and he's got the size and physicality of JB and, the length and athleticism of Kyler, and, so skilled and hard playing and understands what we're trying to do. And I think for us, again, it's been one of those things where as much as we can emulate Boston, it helps those guys when they come down. And, I think as a 5, it's a little bit different, when you're getting a wing player. And, we've had Delano come play with us a couple of times when he was with Boston prior to the trade deadline. And it's like, that's an opportunity for him to just step into a role and play a ton with the basketball and operate and be a primary handler, whereas for us within our offense, within our system, is the 5-man and Nimi's role. And he understands that it's a lot cleaner. You can come in and do the same things you do in Boston, but, he's just a different athlete across the board, and he just provides just a different level of size, quickness, athleticism, and length. That's, there's not too many teams out there with that, but he's been such a fun piece to add to the group, and is like, even though he's only been here for a handful of games, and for typically up to this point, it's been like very short stretches, comes for a game or two and is out, hasn't practiced with us much just because of the needs of Boston. But, every time he's been here, he's communicated how much he enjoys being around this group, how welcoming and fun they are. And I think, again, it just goes such a long way.
Blaine Miller is the first-year head coach of the Maine Celtics. Credit to the organization. They were in the playoffs last year with Alex Barlow, and it was the first playoff appearance for Maine in 7 seasons, and they've been back to the playoffs. And this team, compared to last year's team, just drastically different as far as how it was built. This is a younger group. And speaking of the youth, Jordan Walsh turned 20 at the beginning of March, and I laugh when we spoke to him when he came off that trip when the team was in Miami, was in Dallas. He had a lot of family there because he's from Texas. And he had said, he put it in perspective, I was in high school a year and a half ago. And to take folks a little bit behind the curtain, you're at the hip of Jordan pregame shoot-arounds at the Expo, most specifically. What would you tell Celtics fans? Because they're anxious to see Jordan play at the next level. And he's had his moments where he'll get in a game at the end. What would you tell the fan base about Jordan Walsh and his development year one as a pro?
Patience is a virtue for everyone, myself included, in coaching him. And, he has grown so much from day one as a player, certainly, but again, even more so as a person. And that maturation process where, like you said, a year and a half ago, he's in high school, and now, he's at a high major school where he's a McDonald's All-American and all the fanfare around it. And, then he gets drafted, and, certainly, with his potential and, his measurables and who he is as a person. And he's done an amazing job, as hard as it is. I've told him all year, his job is incredibly hard. For him to come in and, be a draft pick, be a Boston assignment player. The hardest thing for him has been like us, telling him and evaluating him just based on his role and trying as best we can within this environment to have him emulate that role with where he will ultimately fit in with the Celtics. As a rotational wing piece, a defender, 3-and-D, connector, competitor, energy player, make winning plays, like all of the little things, that's ultimately his golden ticket. His key is physically and mentally and emotionally his growth process. But from a basketball skill standpoint, that's what's going to be asked of him. And that's not easy to do. It's not easy to accept that, certainly. And he's done a marvelous job of accepting and understanding that. But then it's a whole other layer to go out and execute that on a night in and night out basis. And, especially when he's got me barking at him every step of the way, trying to hold him accountable, trying to get him to understand and deal with all those outside pressures. Family and friends, social media, the perception of what a basketball player looks like, all of those things that are just working in complete contrast to what he's trying to accomplish. And it was so awesome, the Texas game, for him to have his best game of the year in front of his family and friends. And for us, probably one of, if not the biggest games of the year, with what was on the line for us with a bye and playoff positioning and no JD and DJ in the game. And not just, the production is what it is. It was great. He shot it well, but he had some unbelievable sequences in terms of his competitiveness, in terms of his ability to move on to the next play and get to the next play and, make winning plays down the stretch. He was a huge piece defensively, especially on the defensive glass, down the stretch of the game, making extra effort plays, boxing out their five, allowing other guys to grab rebounds, sprinting the floor, and obviously comes up with the drive and foul and game-winning free throw and the execution piece, and then ultimately hitting it out of bounds to expire the clock. But so cool for us as a team and a staff and an organization to watch that just kind of come full circle, from where we started the year and all the expectations and around and just a rookie season in general. Like being a rookie alone, regardless of where you're at, is really hard. It's a lot. You're playing, he played 20 more games than he ever played in college. The way you're traveling, the way you're preparing, how you're managing your time outside of basketball, very different from college, where obviously you've got classes, but you're also being monitored essentially 24/7 by coaching staffs and teaching assistants and study table and lunch, and you got weight room, and it's like your whole schedule's made, and now it's like, hey, you're here for 1, 2, 3 hours of the day, and the rest of the time's yours. And how are you going to manage that? How are you going to take care of your body? How are you going to take care of your mind? How are you going to relax? How are you going to study the game? All those things. It's a huge adjustment. Living in two places at once. Again, that was for us with Jordan, with JD, Nimi when he was here, Drew when he got here. It's like how do we best make those guys feel like they're a piece of both and not neither? And so all of that, there's so much on a young man like Jordan's plate for him to manage and deal with. And I think Boston should be really excited about his growth and his continued growth as we move through the postseason, and then returning to Boston for him and what that looks like as far as his development plan. And in a lot of ways, kind of going off-season mode for him. Certainly there'll be play groups and stay ready groups for the Boston players to be available and ready to go, depending on the rotation on a series-to-series basis. But for him, it's it's going to be, how do we get ready for next year? How do we get ready for summer league, really? And then summer league comes and goes in August, and then you're rolling into training camp, and who is he from this stage and the growth he's had, and kind of do a full recap, reassess, reevaluate, reset goals, and then move forward. But it's a long journey. It's not over yet. He'll continue to grow, and excited about where he is a month, 3, 4, 5 months from now, and then rolling into the next season.
Good stuff. Here I was thinking college was hard for me, but the way you put it doesn't really make me miss it now all of a sudden, now that you put it that way. But I didn't have to play basketball for a whole year, and not to mention all the training that goes in. And I thought the first word you used was patience, and I thought that's what stood out in the Texas game. He was patient in his approach offensively, and you called it out, you had the 9 defensive rebounds to lead the team that night. 27 for Walsh was a new career high. So we'll get you out on this. It's a waiting game now. We'll do the back end of our podcast tomorrow because we'll find out who the opponent is and we can pick it apart from a media standpoint. We can pick it apart and see how you guys fared. But you mentioned Delano Banton was in town when he was with the organization. When you played Indiana, Tony Snell hit a game-winning 3 in overtime against Delaware recently in this recent surge in March. How do you consume the playoff game tonight between Delaware and Indiana? And just, it's really more of a question like, how are you going about, no matter who wins, just what goes into game plan and strategy? You've seen these teams this year. So what's kind of it's a quick turnaround too, right? They play tonight and then you play Thursday. So just take us through what that process is like leading up to Thursday night.
Yeah. So right now we've got, one assistant staff to each team in terms of scout and one assistant staff to each team in terms of personnel edits and putting that together for the players to absorb. But, and then myself, I'm kind of preparing for both. On a lesser scale, kind of for us more looking at our defense, how we want to guard them, because both teams, even with those games, very different rosters. Even though Delaware was only a few weeks ago, right. For us, for them, we didn't see Jeff Dowden at all. With Delaware's team, expecting to see him, that's another piece where you've got another primary handler, playmaker, shooter out there that adds a different element from the way we game planned and schemed against them last time.
And Indiana's looking at you like, well, they don't have Banton anymore, and we had to game plan for Banton last minute, right? So,
yeah. So and vice versa, and like with Indiana, we didn't see Quentin Jackson was with Windy City at the time. Now he's on a 2-way with Indiana. We didn't see Oscar Shibwe. So there's certain things in terms of like the preparation and maybe a few of the players and some of the actions they're running that. We'll take a look at, but again, it's a little bit of a mad dash for everybody. On one hand, we have one fewer game to play and win, which is great. But on the other hand, I'm sure both of those teams have an assistant working on us, and they're going to have 4 or 5 days to prepare for us if and when they win their first round game. But that's a very good trade-off in my eyes, and to have a home game and have our guys kind of in their comfort zone and prepared. So. We'll watch the game tonight as a staff live, and then get right to the film in terms of cutting stuff up and pulling clips and how we want to piece together a game plan. And tomorrow will be kind of a shoot around, practice around, if you will, in terms of the install, do some film and a team dinner at night, and then be ready to roll Thursday with a shoot around. But again, it's nothing that we haven't seen before in some way, shape, or form, whether it's with either of these teams or another. We're not going to invent, a new coverage or new game plan or do something completely unorthodox that we haven't done this year, and especially over this last month where I think for us, as we got more and more comfortable executing stuff, we did expand quite a bit where we've got enough, I think, in our menu on both ends of the floor to touch on, as those pieces come together. But really it's with the playoffs, you're looking at smaller rotations. Typically you're looking at teams at full strength in some way, shape, or form. And it really comes down to matchups and coverages and the rotation and how are you going to play, certain matchups to put your guys in the best situation to succeed on both ends of the floor. But, a little different for me, having been a part of the Milwaukee Bucks for the last 5 years and being a contender, and I've never not gone to the playoffs, which I'm very fortunate and lucky to say, where you're preparing for a series and there's game theory involved in that. You're trying to win as efficiently as possible. You're not throwing every single thing at your opponent in game one and, kind of emptying your clip, and you got nothing to go to after that if they figure it out. You're trying to win and give away as little as possible. And with this, it's just one game.
It's like the tournament. It's like the tournament, yeah. Right? I mean, go talk to Missoula about how he won with West Virginia. Maybe that might be something you can pick his brain about.
Bust out some 1-3-1 zone. Yeah. But I mean, it's different. It's like you've got to balance. You want to put your best foot forward, give you guys the best chance to succeed, leave no stone unturned. But at the same time, you got a 48-hour turnaround to really less. And it's not, again, like you're not going to overload them and give them a coverage and a scheme for every single little thing. You have to, dive through the film and figure out what are the most important things, what's going to impact the game the most, what do we need to be ready for in terms of their rotation changing, and how are we going to adjust. So it's a little bit of a balancing game still, where you can't do everything. You can't stop every single play, every single player, every time. That'd be sick if you did, but I guess you'd look like UConn right now. But you got to figure out what you're willing to live with, what you're not, what you want to take away, and then if you're willing to live with something and it's beating you, how are you ready and prepared to adjust, whether it's with a lineup or a matchup change or a coverage change.
All right, Coach, we'll enjoy it. Yes, single elimination in the NBA G League playoffs until the finals. So round 2, 7 o'clock Thursday night. Hope you didn't put your winter coat and boots away.
Did not.
That's good.
Living out of my suitcase anyway. So.
Yeah, it's true. You were just in Texas. Now you're back in Portland leading up to Thursday night's game. Blaine Miller, the head coach of the Maine Celtics. We will talk to you Thursday night. Thanks so much for the time.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Many thanks to Blaine Miller for joining us. Really good stuff from the head coach. And he goes through a whole history of his time in Milwaukee, and he discusses Jordan Walsh. Really, he summarizes Jordan's first year as a pro in about 5 minutes, but it was worth every second. Good stuff from Blaine. And again, he's admitted how long-winded he is. But I say that because Blaine even brings it up. But anyway, good stuff from the head coach. Maine Celtics, Delaware Blue Coats, 7 o'clock at the Portland Expo on Thursday night. Game is happening. Got to get your tickets at MaineCeltics.com. We will have the broadcast on radio if you can't make it out to the Expo on Thursday night. Let's dive into a topic we led with Blaine with, Chris, and that is the rebounding. Remember, we did a pod, I think it was with Wieskamp going back now, and one of the things we talked about was defensive rebounding. In the regular season, Maine was probably, at one point they were in the lower third of the league, 23rd, 22nd. They shot all the way up to 11th in defensive rebounding for the regular season. They've been third in defensive rebounding since the beginning of March. They went 9-2 in March. And as far as a team that they can match up well with, which doesn't guarantee anything, because you don't have Oscar Tshiebwe coming to the Expo, who just won G League Rookie of the Year, and he's got that size with Indiana. You get a Delaware team that doesn't have a lot of size, so if Maine holds their ground defensively on the perimeter, they should be okay. But the size, you can't ignore the size differential in this game when you have Kyler Kelly, Neemias Queta, and James Banks on your team, and even some of the forwards and wings that have size.
I mean, yeah, even Peterson and Wieskamp, you got Snell, it's length, and that's what Delaware brings. They're not 6'6", I think was their tallest guy last night in the Indiana lineup, but they do have some length, guys that are a little longer. You got Smith out on the wing, but, like Clark, Council, you got some bulk, and they work hard. They're grinders, and they want every rebound too. So it's one of those things where Maine's big guys can't just take their height for granted. They're going to have to move their feet, and they're going to have to positionally box out, because if you're not boxing out, you have athletes zinging all over the place from Delaware. They're going to come in backside and steal those offensive rebounds, which they did a few times last night against Indiana. And it's, Maine's thing, one of their big strong points is it's their backcourt that rebounds so well. All season long, you've had the Petersons, the Wieskamps, Davisons, Stewarts, all those guys banging on the glass too. You'll look at nights where they have 6 to 8 rebounds apiece. So it's that letting the big guy go and box out and take out, any, say your Clark or your Councils or any of your big guys from the other team, letting them box out, clear them out, and having the backcourt come in and clean up the glass that way. And the way Maine's built, you have a Kelly or a Queta who aren't going to be your ball handlers, but you have the other 4 guys where a defensive rebound is basically an outlet, and Maine can get out and run because anybody can put the ball down on the floor. And if you get the guys up and running, get the ball in the middle of the floor and have the guys coming down the outside, it becomes that track meet that Maine's really athletic. And I don't want people to oversee that, yeah, Maine's way bigger than Delaware. Maine's athleticism is right on par with Delaware's. And when you have those wings coming out, it's guys are going to have open threes in transition. Guys are going to be able to get to the rim in transition. So rebounding's been such a big catalyst for this Maine team, along with the defense. It goes hand in hand, defense and defensive rebounding. But it's been such a big catalyst for them to be able to get out and run teams down that way. So it'll be a fun matchup to watch. How is Delaware going to compensate for the size? How are they going to take care of Kata, Kelly? How are they going to keep them off the glass and the offensive glass too? But at the defensive end, how are they going to be able to slow down Maine? Because if Maine owns them on the glass, it's going to be a long night because it's going to be one and dones for Delaware. And we saw last night they shot 52% from the floor, 56 from three. If they start missing those shots, which they did, and Indiana was able to climb back into it and get it down to like that 9-11 point deficit a couple times in the second half. If they can't get offensive rebounds against Maine and they're not shooting at that 50% clip, I'd give them probably – they're going to have to shoot 42% or better to stay in the game, but they're going to have probably – 5 to 10 offensive rebounds as well, because if not, Maine's just going to control the pace. Maine's going to be able to get out in transition, and it's going to be hard for Delaware to stop at that point in time because it's only going to take a couple guys from Delaware to get in foul trouble. Then it becomes a real problem for them.
I'm a big fan of their coach, Mike Longobardi, former Boston Celtics assistant coach. Was on the 08 Celtics staff with Doc Rivers, if you can believe that. Going back now in time, he was on the Cleveland Cavaliers staff that won it when LeBron returned for his second stint there. So he's been around basketball. They've got an older head coach who's been around, and he's plugged and played with different pieces. I think you hit this early on in the podcast. So just to go back in time, they had David Duke on their roster on a standard G League contract, who's been a two-way before with the Nets organization. David Duke got a two-way with the Spurs. He's out. Javonte Smart was the point guard I think we saw at the Expo during the showcase in December. Bought out in January. Kenny Lofton, who has been an all-star at this level. Two-way was terminated by the Sixers early March, and then Darius Baisley, who was with the team, earned an NBA contract from the Jazz March 12th. They've had guys come in and out. And the same can be said about Maine, but they might have had a guy miss a game or two, but the roster has, for the most part, stayed pretty connected, the core pieces, that is. And whether or not Kata comes or if Walsh goes on a trip or if J.D. Davison's on assignment, etc., which happens with two ways. Something else basketball-wise to watch in this game, and then we'll do a quick bracket preview from what's going on around the G League and what might happen this weekend. Turnovers. Got to take care of the ball against this team. Delaware, number 3 in the league in points off turnovers, and they commit the fewest turnovers per game. That's the path for Delaware, right? That's the path. If they can shoot a respectable number from 3, and they even hung around last night. They hung around on the glass. It wasn't a huge rebounding discrepancy, right? So they hung in there. If you turn the ball over and give them fast break points and easy baskets and let those guys run on you, not to say Maine can't run too, but if you're not careful and let them turn it into a track meet, they'll hang around and they can win this game on Thursday. So they got to take care of the ball, the Maine Celtics.
The first 12 minutes are going to tell a big story of how this game may end up going. If Maine can play perimeter defense, which that's where their size and length is going to come into play, because they're not going to have, if they're contesting shots and they're making it hard on the perimeter, with the back end defense they're going to have with the Katas and the Kellys at the rim, it's going to be tough for Delaware to kind of freelance and move around like they did last night. But Maine's length out on the perimeter is what's going to pay off defensively, because if they just get a hand up and contest shots, it's going to be a long night there. They're not going to have the open looks they may have had against the Mad Ants. But at the same time, like you touched on, those as Maine can run off the defensive glass, because in taking care of that with the roster they have, Delaware does the same thing defensively. So it's going to be a battle of Maine needs to win the defensive glass, but who's going to win the turnover battle? Because like you said, if the rebounding and turnovers, I touch on it a lot on air, those balance each other out. So if you look at the rebounding margin compared to the turnover margin, you can kind of see how the score is going and who's dictating that kind of thing. So it's going to be Maine, can you win the glass? But Maine, can you take care of the basketball on the offensive end and not give them things? Because that's where foul trouble can get coming to Maine. And all of a sudden Maine's size can come down because the big guys are going to be chasing from behind and trying to attack guys that are going out in transition. And that could be a problem for Maine too. So yes, turnovers, watch that for Maine offensively, and then perimeter defense. And if you can see that the first 5-6 minutes of the game is going to give that away of who's going to make the adjustments and take care of that way, that could tell a lot as well.
Both teams were pretty good guarding the 3. Delaware was 7th in the league at 34%, letting their opponent shoot from 3. Maine was about 35%. Also around 34%. Both teams' parallels perimeter defense-wise very similar, and that speaks to, you can just tell by going down the rosters, and the talent matters too, don't get me wrong, but the build of their wings, it's similar. on both ends. So they both have an idea. They know about each other quite a bit. Celtics, Sixers, and who knows, maybe we get this kind of matchup in the Boston playoffs because it could shape up seeing Joel Embiid back in the lineup last night. Anyway, that's an aside. So let's lay it down here for the people. If Maine wins Thursday night and Osceola, the 1 seed, the Magic affiliate, if they beat Long Island on Friday, so that second game is on Friday, that means the Eastern Conference final, 1 game, single elim, would be Sunday night, 7 o'clock in Florida. If Maine wins tomorrow and Long Island upsets Osceola, which I put upset in air quotes, and the same would be said about Delaware if Delaware knocked Maine out. The East has been tight all year, so these are no longer this wouldn't be a surprise at this stage of the season too, with who's available, personnel. Delaware lost their last 3 games and backed into this playoffs, but that's a well-run team. We've just been giving them their flowers here. So anyway, if Maine wins and Long Island knocks off Osceola on Friday, the Eastern Conference final would be at the Expo on Sunday night at 7 o'clock. That's the lay of the land. And there is a path. There is a very strong possibility Maine could be back at home on Sunday night.
I may or may not have filled out a G League bracket. It's G League Madness time. It is. We went back. We got touched on it earlier on how Maine's getting to that point, to the Delaware point, where they're consistent playoff contenders. People have to realize too that only 6 teams make these playoffs. So it's not like the top 8, or there's no play-in where 7 through 10 are playing in a playoff to get to the to be the 8 and 9 seeds in the tournament. There's only 6 teams getting in. So if you're in the top 6 each and every year in your conference, your organization is doing a good job there. But bracket wise, and I've put it on a watch. If I'm on TV right now as an analyst, my upset alert is down in Osceola, because Osceola struggled. Granted, they sat one man here or there those last 3 games, but they're on a slide going into these playoffs, and they just had to sit and wait. And people talk about how good it is for the bye. You could rest, get some guys that might be banged up back. But they just sat from Saturday to Friday without playing a game as well. And Long Island got to battle into the last seconds last night. So my upset special is Long Island over Osceola. We just got to get Maine a win and pack the Expo tomorrow night to back them as much as we can. MaineCeltics.com to get those tickets tomorrow night. I know there's going to be there's a little weather coming into town. We'll see how that goes. But people get out Thursday night and get Maine into that, because if they do get that win, something special is going to happen to the Expo, and you're going to be hosting an Eastern Conference Championship game for the right to the G League Championship Sunday night at 7 at the Expo.
Tickets start at $10 right now over at MaineCeltics.com. Check it out. Get your tickets, and we look forward to being with you on Thursday. We will be in the building. We'll be on the radio as well, 96.3, The Big Jab, our radio partner. There will be a TV broadcast available as well on ESPN News for the 7 o'clock tip, and then more to come. If we'll do our post-game deal Thursday. If they win, we'll try to get a sense of what that all looks like. Again, we won't know where they're going until Friday night, because Osceola plays Friday night. They're getting an extra day of rest, and they're welcoming in Long Island. So we won't even know after Thursday night. I shouldn't even say that. After Thursday night, we still won't know where Maine will be on Sunday, whether they'll stay home or they'll make the trip down to Florida. So thanks again to Blaine Miller for joining us on the podcast. Really good stuff to get us set for the postseason. For Chris Whitney, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for listening all season long. We hope to keep doing this as the playoffs continue, and we will keep you posted. Again, check us out, MaineCeltics.com, Maine Celtics YouTube. Maine Celtics playoffs start Thursday night, second round of the Eastern Conference. They take on the Delaware Blue Coats, 7 o'clock, MaineCeltics.com to get your tickets. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.